It was Catherine's birthday dinner. My wife, gone 1 year. That night, my son-in-law Connor slapped my daughter 3 times across the face, just because she spilled water. His mother Judith stood up and clapped. "That's how she learns to behave," she said. "They thought their power could silence me. They thought I'd sit there and take it. They had no idea who they were dealing with." I stood up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. I pulled out my phone and made one call. What happened next? They didn't stop screaming. Their world collapsed, all because they dared to hurt my daughter in front of me. Comment now? What's your first reaction to what happened at that dinner table, and tell me, where are you watching from? I'm reading every single comment. My name is Christopher Barnes. I am a lawyer who has spent 32 years defending women from abusive men. But nothing prepared me to witness my own daughter being struck right in front of me by the man she called her husband. That night, after I called the police and watched Connor Foster being taken away in handcuffs, I sat in my study and tried to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. How had I, a man who had dedicated his entire professional life to recognizing the signs of abuse, missed them completely in my own home? The answer wasn't simple, but it started 18 months earlier when my world had already begun to collapse in a different way. My wife, Catherine, was a psychologist specializing in trauma and family dynamics. She was brilliant, compassionate, and had an uncanny ability to read people. One evening about 5 years ago, Catherine and I had dinner with our daughter Hannah and her new boyfriend, Connor Foster. Halfway through the meal, Catherine leaned over and whispered something to me that I should have taken more seriously. There's something not quite right about him. At the time, I dismissed it. Hannah was glowing. She was happy. How could I question that? But Catherine wasn't wrong about much. She passed away 18 months ago, a massive stroke while she was sleeping. Just like that, she was gone. The woman who could read a room like a book, who understood the psychology of relationships better than anyone I knew, was no longer here. And with her death, I lost not just my wife, but also my compass. I threw myself into work, into cases that demanded my attention, into anything that could keep my mind off the emptiness in our home in Chicago. Our beautiful house that had once been filled with her laughter now felt like a museum of memories. During those months of grief, I barely noticed when Hannah seemed to pull away. I was too absorbed in my own pain. I didn't see that she'd stopped mentioning her friends. I didn't register that she'd quit her job at the engineering firm where she'd been thriving. I didn't ask questions when she started wearing longer sleeves, even as spring turned to summer. I was a lawyer trained to spot patterns of control and abuse in other people's families. But I was blind to what was happening in my own. Hannah is 30 years old, smart, capable, and engineer with a mind that solves complex problems, like it's breathing. She inherited Catherine's ability to read people and my tenacity. She got married to Connor Foster 2 years ago. On paper, he seemed perfect. Successful, charming, a consultant who spoke with confidence about his work. At our wedding, I remember thinking he was exactly the kind of man I would have wanted for my daughter. How wrong I was. That night at the dinner table, when Judith's applause echoed through the room after her son struck my daughter, something inside me shifted. The fog of grief that had been clouding my judgment for 18 months suddenly lifted. In that single moment of clarity, I understood what I had failed to see. My daughter had been trapped, and I had been too lost in my own sorrow to notice. My wife had been right about Connor all those years ago, and now I had to decide what kind of father I was going to be. One who could finally see the truth, or one who would keep pretending everything was fine. I chose to see. 5 years ago, Hannah was at an industrial engineering conference in Boston. She was 27, then brilliant, independent, the kind of woman who made Catherine and me incredibly proud. That's where she met Connor Foster. He was also 27, a consultant who worked for some firm in the Midwest. From what Hannah told us, they talked for 3 hours straight. 3 hours. She didn't even notice the time passing. He was charming, the kind of man who makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. Smart, successful, with an easy confidence that made everything he said sound important. When Hannah called to tell us about him, I could hear the excitement in her voice. Catherine met him first. It was a dinner at our place a few months later. I remember Catherine being polite, smiling, asking the right questions. But after he and Hannah left, Catherine pulled me aside in the kitchen. "There's something not quite right about him," she said quietly. I asked what she meant, but she just shook her head. "I can't explain it, but trust me on this one. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd asked more questions instead of brushing it off as Catherine being overprotective. But I was busy with cases, and Hannah seemed happy. Who was I to question that? They got married 2 years later. It was beautiful, Hannah looking radiant in her white dress, Connor playing the perfect husband. I remember thinking that Catherine had been wrong about him, but Catherine wasn't wrong about much. At first, everything seemed fine. Hannah mentioned she'd stopped going to the gym on Friday nights because Connor preferred they spend that time together. She'd given up meeting her college friends for happy hour. When I asked about it, she smiled and said she was just prioritizing differently now. Connor makes me happy, she said. Then came the subtle comments. Maybe you shouldn't wear that dress to work, Connor would say, or you talk too much in meetings. Hannah would laugh it off, but I noticed she started dressing differently. More conservative, less like herself. Maybe you're too independent, Connor told her once at dinner. Women need to learn how to listen, not always try to lead. Hannah just nodded and smiled. She didn't argue back. That wasn't like her. I should have seen it then. I should have recognized the pattern. But I was too caught up in my own world, too focused on my cases. Then Connor mentioned his mother. My mom's going to move closer to us, he said one evening. She's been thinking about relocating to Chicago anyway. It'll be nice to have family nearby. Hannah's smile tightened just a little, but she said nothing. That was when I should have paid closer attention. That was when I should have asked my daughter if everything was really okay. But I didn't. Within months, Judith Walsh would arrive in Chicago with plans none of us could have anticipated. Judith Walsh arrived like a storm I didn't see coming. She was 62, a widow who had raised Connor alone. Within days of moving 3 blocks away, she had a key to their house and used it freely. Every morning brought her through the front door. She'd reorganize the kitchen, throw out Hannah's spices, comment on her clothes skirts, too short blouses, too revealing. The mashed potatoes were always too salty. Nothing Hannah did was ever quite right. And Connor agreed with everything his mother said. When Hannah tried to push back, he'd side with Judith. Mom knows what she's talking about, he'd say. Hannah would just nod and retreat further into herself. I noticed she stopped laughing. Her calls to me became shorter. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say, "Just tired, Dad." 8 months after Judith moved to Chicago, Connor hit Hannah for the first time. It started over something small. She'd forgotten his dry cleaning. When he came home and realized it, something shifted in his face. He said she was careless, disrespectful, that she didn't know her place. That's when he hit her. Just once that first time. Not hard enough to leave a visible mark, but hard enough for Hannah to understand that something fundamental had changed. He apologized immediately, held her, told her he loved her more than anything. He bought her flowers the next day. Hannah believed him. She believed it was a one-time thing, but it happened again. The pattern became familiar. Trigger, explosion, apology, gifts, temporary peace, then trigger again. Each time the reasons were trivial. She wore the wrong thing. She spoke out of turn. She used a tone he didn't like. And each time after Connor hit her, Hannah would search for what she'd done wrong. She'd replay the moment in her head, trying to avoid it next time. This was her fault. She needed to be more careful, more aware, more obedient. Around the same time Hannah quit her job, I suspect Connor demanded it. A woman at home is easier to control than one out in the world, making her own money, seeing other people, thinking her own thoughts. I should have asked more questions. I should have noticed that my brilliant daughter, the engineer who used to talk about changing the world, had stopped talking about anything at all. The moment that finally broke through my blindness came about 6 months later. I was at their house for dinner. While Connor was running late, I went to get something from the kitchen drawer, and I found it Catherine's Japanese knife. The beautiful one I'd given her years ago, now bent and damaged beyond repair. Hannah saw me holding it and went pale. "What happened to this?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just looked away and started setting the table with trembling hands. I didn't press her. I just put the knife back and pretended I hadn't seen it. But that broken knife stayed with me. It felt like a message from Catherine herself, a signal that something was terribly wrong in my daughter's life. 18 months passed like that, Connor's rage intensifying, Hannah shrinking further, Judith orchestrating it all. And then came that dinner on March 20th, the one I will never forget. March 20th, the day that changed everything. I remember every detail with the clarity that comes from trauma. That evening was Catherine's birthday. She would have been 61. Hannah had called me that morning. "Dad, come to dinner tonight, please." There was something in her voice I should have caught, but I was drowning in work using cases to outrun grief. When I arrived at their Chicago townhouse, everything looked perfect. Fine china, scented candles, fresh flowers, but the air felt wrong, cold, suffocating. Hannah emerged wearing a long-sleeved blouse despite the mild March evening. Her hair was cut short and severe. She looked like she was trying to disappear. When she hugged me, I felt how thin she'd become. Connor and Judith were already seated. Judith smiled with warmth that didn't reach her eyes. Connor shook my hand firmly, his charm switched on. They were performing the role of the perfect family. We began dinner with small talk. Judith dominated the conversation about her real estate investments and book club. Hannah barely spoke. She ate mechanically, her eyes fixed on her plate. Connor's hand occasionally reached for his wine, and I noticed how Hannah's shoulders tensed. Then it happened. Hannah was pouring water. Her hand trembled slightly, and a single drop fell into Connor's glass. It was nothing, but Connor's entire body went rigid. "Do you see what you did?" he said quietly. His voice was controlled, calculated. "I'm sorry I didn't," Hannah started. That's when he stood up. What happened next took maybe 5 seconds. His hand came up fast, connecting with Hannah's right cheek. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Her head snapped sideways. Before she could process it, his hand came around again, harder, catching her left cheek. I saw her eyes widen in shock and pain. Then a third blow across her face. Hannah stumbled backward, her hand reaching blindly. She hit the edge of the table. Blood trickled from her mouth. Judith started clapping. "That's how she learns to behave," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Slow, measured claps, like she was applauding a performance. In that moment, something inside me switched. 32 years of being a lawyer, of maintaining distance and objectivity, evaporated. But I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. Instead, I went silent. 30 seconds of absolute silence. My mind, the part trained over 3 decades to understand restraining orders. Evidence testimony activated. I was taking inventory, the candles masking the smell of violence, the way Judith smiled, the tremor in Hannah's hands, the words they'd said. All of it would matter in court. I pulled out my phone with steady hands. "I'm calling the police," I said. My voice was quiet and professional, the voice I used with judges. Connor's face went pale. Judith's clapping stopped. "You're overreacting," Connor said. "She needs to learn." 17 minutes. I told him already, dialing. "That's how long they'll take from the North Precinct. I suggest you both sit down." I reported the assault calmly. Names, addresses, injuries, witnesses. The dispatcher could hear the control in my voice because I'd practiced it 1,000 times. Before, just never, for my own daughter. 17 minutes later, Sergeant Thomas Kelly walked through the front door with 2 officers. He noted the blood on Hannah's face, the fear in her eyes, the casual cruelty radiating from Connor and Judith. They were handcuffed and read their rights. Connor kept his eyes on me as they let him out. "You don't know who you're fucking with," he said quietly. "Enjoy the ride to the precinct," I replied. But even as I said it, I knew he was right. I didn't know. None of us did. We had no idea that his arrest was only the beginning of something far darker, something that would unearth secrets buried for 11 years. The days following the arrest were strange, quiet but threatening, like waiting for a storm you can see gathering on the horizon. Hannah stayed at my house in Georgetown. She barely left her room. I'd hear her crying at night, and during the day she'd sit on the couch with her laptop closed, staring at nothing. I tried to tell her it would be okay, that the evidence was overwhelming, that justice would prevail. I'd won cases against worse odds, but my words felt hollow, even to me. 3 days after Connor's arrest, my paralegal called. "Mr. Barnes, there's a blog. You need to see it." I pulled it up immediately. The truth behind false accusations. Anonymous, sophisticated layout, professional writing. It painted a very different narrative than what had happened in my dining room. Hannah was a liar, a woman scorned inventing stories for attention and money. I was a man-hater lawyer, using my daughter as a pawn in an anti-male crusade. Connor Foster was the real victim, a good man destroyed by a toxic woman's fabrications. The blog included photos. Hannah at a party laughing, holding a cocktail. Out of context, it looked damning. Me leaving the courthouse, my face grim and determined, captioned as "the Predator's handler." By day 5, the blog had been shared 3,000 times. Hannah got the call from HR on Thursday. They were concerned about the company's reputation. They were deeply sorry, but given the circumstances, they had no choice. She'd worked there for 4 years, Employee of the Month twice, gone in a 5-minute phone call. At the grocery store, an old friend of Hannah's, Rachel Stone, someone I'd known since Hannah was 12, literally turned around in the hair products aisle when she saw us coming. She pretended not to see us. Hannah's face crumpled. Then my accountant called. Christopher, the IRS, wants a full audit. 5 years of returns. They're saying there are irregularities. I knew better. This wasn't about irregularities. This was about leverage. The Foster family had connections, money, resources that reached into places I'd underestimated. That's when it hit me. Really hit me that I'd been so focused on winning the legal battle that I hadn't prepared for this one. The court of public opinion. The quiet destruction of everything Hannah had built. The slow strangulation of my professional reputation. I'd spent 32 years defending women against men who use power to silence them. And now I was watching Connor and Judith do exactly that to Hannah. Except they weren't just using physical force anymore. They were using narrative, whisper campaigns, strategic leaks to sympathetic bloggers, an anonymous coordinated assault on our credibility. The police had the evidence. The case was solid. But none of that mattered if nobody would listen to us. If every time Hannah tried to speak, people saw a party photo and a cocktail. If every time I tried to advocate, people saw a zealot. Hannah found me in my study that night. She looked smaller than ever. Dad, what if they win? She asked quietly. I wanted to tell her they couldn't. I wanted to promise her that the truth always prevails. But I was learning painfully that the truth is just one voice in a much noisier room. We're not done yet, I said. Not even close. She nodded, but the hope in her eyes had dimmed. 2 weeks passed like that, us in limbo, the blog growing, the whispers spreading, my audit expanding. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was from Connor's jail phone. Tell Hannah I'm coming home and I'm taking what's mine. That's when I realized something else. Connor and Judith weren't just trying to destroy our case. They were playing a longer game. And I still didn't understand the full scope of what I was up against. Connor started texting from jail through his lawyer's phone. The first message came on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm sorry, I've been thinking. I made a mistake. I wasn't myself that night. Hannah read it to me, with trembling hands. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to believe him warring with the part that remembered his fists. The second message arrived 2 days later. I've been in therapy. The psychologist says I have impulse control disorder. I never knew. I'm getting help, Hannah. Real help. I'm not the man you saw. That's when she started wavering. Maybe he really didn't know, she said quietly. Maybe it's not his fault. I sat across from her at my kitchen table and pulled up the statistics I'd compiled over 3 decades. 70% of women who return to abusers experience escalated violence within the first year. The data was brutal and undeniable. Hannah listened to me. This is textbook manipulation. The apology, the diagnosis, the therapy narrative. It's designed to make you feel responsible for his healing. It's not. She cried, hard. The kind of crying that comes from being caught between love and survival. I know, she whispered. I know, but I need time to think. I gave her that time. It was the hardest thing I'd done in weeks. 14 days later, the phone rang at 2 a.m. Mr. Barnes, this is Sergeant Kelly. Your daughter's house has been vandalized extensively. My heart stopped. But it wasn't Hannah. It was the townhouse, the one she'd shared with Connor, the one she'd moved out of after his arrest. When we arrived, the scene was devastating. The front door was shattered, windows blown out, spray paint covered every surface. Liar! I will kill you! This isn't over. He'd punched through drywall, smashed furniture. The destruction was systematic, intentional, a 3-hour tantrum of rage captured by every security camera on the block. He violated the restraining order, Sergeant Kelly explained. Called his lawyer from a burner phone, hired someone to get him out for the night. They were sloppy. We have him on video. Multiple angles, crystal clear. Connor was arrested again within hours. I looked at the footage myself. 4 hours later, I was still watching. The way he moved through the house. The precision of his destruction. The moment he sprayed, I will kill you, directly at the camera. Looking straight into the lens, daring us to prosecute him. This was no impulse control disorder. This was calculated. This was a message. This was Connor showing Hannah exactly what awaited her if she testified. Finally, we had evidence that was unshakable. Video. Clear as day, indefensible. But as I watched him destroy what had been Hannah's home, I realized something else. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about survival. For both of them, for him and for Hannah. Finally, I told Sergeant Kelly, we have solid evidence, but there's something even more important coming. 3 days later, an anonymous package arrived at the police station. It was addressed to me marked urgent evidence inside. Inside were audio recordings, hours of them. And when I listened to the first one, I understood why someone had waited 11 years to send them. The package bore no markings, no return address, no postage meter, just my name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Inside were files, dozens of them, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. Sergeant Kelly sat across from me in his office as we listened to the first recording. The audio was grainy but clear enough, Judith's voice unmistakable. He needed to understand his place. Women like that, independent women, they need to learn respect. Connor understands that now. I taught him. The second recording came from a different date. Judith again speaking to Connor in a way that made my stomach turn. This is what we did with your father. He wanted to resist too. But some men don't deserve second chances. My hands went cold. The third recording was even worse. Do you think you're capable of doing what's necessary? Judith asked. Yes, Mother. I know what you did, Connor replied. What she had done. Sergeant Kelly paused the playback. Mr. Barnes, we need to bring in homicide. We're reopening the investigation into Richard Foster's death, 11 years ago, listed as a heart attack, but the fourth recording was a direct threat. If Christopher doesn't back away from this, Judith said coldly, perhaps she will have an accident too. Accidents happen to interfering people. That's when the office door opened. An old man stood there, 77 years old, gray hair, trembling hands. Behind him was a younger officer who'd escorted him from the waiting room. I'm Martin Foster, he said quietly. Richard's brother. I'm the one who sent the package. For a moment nobody moved. Martin sat down heavily. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've known for 11 years. Judith killed Richard. I heard her plan it. I heard her do it. But I was afraid. I was always afraid of her. When Richard died, I told myself it was a heart attack. I let myself believe it. Why send the recordings now? Kelly asked. Martin's eyes found mine. Because I watched what she did to your daughter. And I realized that if I didn't act now, she would keep destroying people. She would never stop. She'd already killed once. Why would she hesitate again? He pulled out his phone. I spent 3 weeks getting close to Judith, recording conversations. She talks to Connor about everything when she thinks nobody's listening. She's proud of what she did to Richard, proud of how she's controlled Connor, proud of how she's trying to destroy Hannah. Martin's hands shook as he spoke. I was a coward for 11 years, but watching that young woman get beaten, watching you fight so hard, I couldn't be a coward anymore. I had to choose between my fear and my conscience. I didn't know what to say. There's more, Martin continued. He handed me a folder. Medical records. Richard's autopsy. There was digitalis in his system. Slow acting. Judith had access. She was always giving him supplements, vitamins. Nobody suspected anything because she played the grieving widow perfectly. Sergeant Kelly was already making calls. Federal agents, homicide detectives. The machinery of justice finally shifting in the right direction. As Martin left the office, placed in protective custody immediately, he stopped at the door. I'm sorry it took me so long, he said. I'm sorry I was afraid. I wanted to tell him it didn't matter, that he was brave now when it counted. Now we had proof that Judith Walsh wasn't just protecting an abuser. She was a murderer, a calculated, deliberate killer who'd gotten away with it for over a decade. And she'd raised a son who mirrored her darkness perfectly. With this new evidence, the prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into Richard Foster's death from 11 years before. Everything was about to change. Connor Foster's trial lasted 3 weeks. Judge Leonard Brooks presided over the courtroom, with the kind of patience that comes from seeing too many cases like this. The evidence was straightforward. Security footage of Connor destroying Hannah's home. My testimony about the 3 slaps. Hannah's tearful account of the violence. Sergeant Kelly's professional documentation of the scene. Connor's defense attorney tried. He argued impulse control disorder. He blamed Judith's influence. He claimed Connor was a victim of his upbringing, of his mother's manipulation of circumstances beyond his control. Judge Brooks didn't buy it. The evidence shows a pattern of calculated violence, he said. Not an impulse, a choice. Repeated choices. Connor was found guilty of domestic violence. 5 years in state prison. A permanent restraining order. Mandatory anger management and domestic violence education. As the verdict was read, Connor looked directly at Hannah. His expression didn't change. No remorse, no anger, just emptiness. Like something inside him had died or maybe had never existed at all. Hannah cried, but I saw something else in her tears' relief. 2 months later, we were back in the same courtroom for Judith Walsh. The case was different. The stakes were higher. This wasn't about domestic violence. This was about murder. The prosecution presented the recordings. Judith's own words damning her. Martin Foster testified about what he'd heard, what he'd witnessed over 11 years. The old forensic report on Richard Foster came back under new scrutiny. The digitalis in his system, the accidental heart attack that now looked like calculated poisoning. Financial records showed that Judith had taken control of Richard's entire estate immediately after his death. $2 million. She'd been living off his murder for a decade. Judge Brooks listened to everything with an expression that suggested he'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and accepted it as inevitable. Judith took the stand. She didn't deny anything. Instead, she attacked. "This is what Christopher Barnes does," she screamed at the judge. "He destroys families. He poisons people against their own flesh and blood. He's a man-hating—" "Ms. Walsh," Judge Brooks interrupted, "you're not helping your case." But she didn't care. She kept screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I'd turned everyone against her, how I was the real criminal. Nobody believed her. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty of felony murder, 12 years in prison. The sentence was reduced from life because of her age, but it didn't matter. Judith Walsh would spend her remaining years in a cell, the same way she'd spent the last 11 years controlling what she could, destroying what she couldn't. As they led her away, she locked eyes with me one last time. There was no remorse there either, just rage, pure undiluted rage that she'd been caught. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I realized something profound. Justice and healing are not the same thing. The law could put Connor and Judith away, but it couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't restore Hannah's sense of safety. It couldn't bring Catherine back. It couldn't erase the years I'd spent drowning in my own grief. Justice was served. The guilty were convicted. The system worked. But real healing, that was a different battle entirely. 6 months later, I stood in front of Catherine's photograph and realized something had changed inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. It was something quieter. Something that felt like permission to stop fighting long enough to actually live again. 5 years have passed since that fateful dinner. I sit in my study in Chicago, watching the afternoon light filter through the windows. The house is quiet now, peaceful in a way it hasn't been since Catherine died. Hannah doesn't live here anymore. She has her own life. She has her own happiness. Last week I watched her laugh with Ryan Parker at a coffee shop downtown. Really laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who's learned the difference between fear and freedom. Ryan is a good man, respectful, genuinely interested in Hannah's thoughts, her dreams. He encourages her to see her friends. He doesn't monitor her phone. He doesn't try to control what she wears or where she goes. He loves her the way love is supposed to feel. As we sat across from each other over coffee, Hannah reached across the table and held my hand. "I wanted to say thank you," she said quietly, "for not letting go, for believing me when I wasn't sure I believed myself." I thought about Catherine in that moment, about how she would have seen this day, how proud she would be. "Your mother would be so proud of you," I told her. Hannah smiled through tears. "I think she knows. I've spent the last year writing my memoir. Not to relive the trauma, but to transform it into something useful. Something that might help someone else recognize the warning signs I missed. The isolation. The control disguised as love. The way abuse always starts quiet and grows louder until you can't hear anything else. If my story helps even one woman recognize these signs, if it gives her the courage to say no before it's too late, then all of this has been worth it. Connor is in prison. Judith is in prison. They're both exactly where they need to be. But there are thousands more like them. Thousands of Hannahs still trapped. Thousands of Christophers still sleeping through the warning signs. So I'm asking you, when will you speak up? If someone you know is being controlled, isolated, when will you say something? When will you push past the discomfort of getting involved? When will you be willing to ruin a dinner party, sacrifice a friendship, lose a client to save someone's life? And if you're the one being hurt, when will you say enough? When will you realize that what you're tolerating isn't love? When will you understand that you deserve better? True love doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't demand your submission. It doesn't come with bruises and apologies and promises to change. True love expands you, protects you, celebrates you. I think about Catherine often, about how she tried to warn me about Connor, about how I was too blind with my own grief to listen, but I listened when it mattered. I acted when it counted. And because of that, Hannah is free. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not the memory of the violence, but the proof that it can be stopped. That justice, however imperfect, is possible. That healing, however slow, is real. I stand at my window and watch the Chicago sunset. Hannah's out there somewhere building a life that's actually hers. And for the first time in years, I can breathe. True love never hurts. Never. Looking back at everything that's happened, I realize I made a critical mistake as a father. I was so consumed by my own grief after Catherine's death that I missed the most important case of my life, the one happening under my own roof. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the bruises appear. Don't rationalize the isolation. Don't mistake control for care. Here's what I learned. Real love expands you. It doesn't shrink you. Real love celebrates your independence. It doesn't demand your submission. If someone is slowly cutting you off from friends, monitoring your movements, criticizing everything you do, that's not love. That's a cage disguised as devotion. And I want to tell you something else. God doesn't design love to hurt. I'm a man of faith, and I know that whatever higher power guides us wants us to experience joy, not pain. If you're praying for strength to endure abuse, know that God's answer might be leave. Sometimes protection looks like escape. This isn't just my grandpa's stories or some distant true story you can ignore. This is happening to millions of women right now. Women who wake up one morning and realize they don't recognize themselves anymore. Women trapped in the same cycle Hannah almost didn't escape from. The true story of what happened to my daughter became the catalyst for justice. But yours could be different if you act now. If you recognize these warning signs in your own life or someone you love, don't stay silent. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't hope he'll change. This is where I need you. Comment below and tell me what kept you trapped, or what gave you the courage to leave. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Subscribe to this channel because I'll keep telling these true story accounts until every woman knows her worth. My grandpa's stories pale in comparison to what real women endure, but what matters is that we speak, we listen, we believe. The price of silence is too high. Don't let it be you.